So, more than 6% of Boston's land area would have been actually impacted had Hurricane Sandy hit earlier. And it would have affected, obviously, the Harbor Islands, all the waterfront neighborhoods. And then it would have gone, for example, through Quincy Market, close to City Hall. You would have had, various areas along the waterfront very much impacted.
How bad would it have been? I mean, are we talking like 6 inches of flooding, 2 feet of flooding?
Well, it's very hard to predict. And also, it goes with the tide. So it would have been at high tide. It would have been a certain period of time. I think it'd be hard to speculate totally all the things that would have been impacted, but I think at the MBTA they're clearly concerned about what would have happened at some of the entrances to the subway facilities, such as at the Aquarium Station and such, and obviously at the T where it's level. There would have been some significant impacts. Fortunately, they had started to plan at the MWRA, with the treatment plan and such. They were closing down certain things, but the facilities do have to run 24/7. So I think it's been a real wake-up call for all of them as they do emergency preparedness now. We've been at a number of meetings now with the Water and Sewer Commission. We've been at the MWRA. We're talking to Massport at the airport. All of the places are really starting to think very hard about what they need to do for contingency. So one of the things that the report says is that if we want to plan for 2050 when there will be sea level rise or earlier, that property owners should start to do vulnerability assessments to look at what they can do in the short term and factor into their capital budgets any long-term improvements. So a lot of the office buildings and the properties along the waterfront, every 15 to 20 years, they're doing improvements anyway. So as long as they factor in this emergency preparedness and think about the vulnerability, they're going to be fine. In the short term, a lot of them have made provisions for sandbags and such to protect the properties. But, fortunately, sea level rise, because of the fact that there's been so much attention on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, hasn't risen as high as in other places. So we still have some time to prepare.
Remind me, what are we talking about in terms of, with 2050 as sort of a point of reference, how much higher will the ocean be now, or be that than it is now?
Well, it'll be anywhere from, probably in 2050 it could go up as much as 2 feet. By 2100, the end of the century, it could be as much as 6 feet. So people are starting to plan using those numbers. And those are fairly conservative numbers in terms of what might happen, here in Boston. So we know, for example, that by 2050, things like the Boston Convention Visitors Bureau, we know that by 2050, buildings such as the Boston Convention Exposition Center may be vulnerable, Conley Terminal, the airport behind us. So a lot of planning is already starting to occur to take into account that we want to be able to protect those resources and facilities that are used by the public.
And what sort of neighborhoods do we see affected if that were to, with higher ocean levels in 2050, what parts of the city would then be submerged?
Well, places that we had considered inland, for example, such as Back Bay and portions of Beacon Hill, potentially could be flooded because the waters would go over the Charles River Dam. And so even though they consider themselves inland, unfortunately, if sea level rise was to occur at a much faster rate than has been projected, communities like that also would be affected.
So, and that's if sea level occurs at a faster rate than has been projected, or if it just occurs where we expect, goes where we
anywhere
expect it to go.
from 2.5 to sea level rise, increase in sea level rise. So 2.5 feet increase in sea level rise, which could take us through the end of this century. Then you'll have some of those neighborhoods impacted as well. The scientists are very general in terms of they can't totally predict what will happen.